And yes. Hello, everyone. This is another ALA/SLA event. We're talking with Emily Mason. She was a graduate of the SIS program and now works primarily in UX design. So take it away, Emily. We're so excited to have you here and hear all about your job.
Yeah. So I was initially introduced to UX in the MSIS program. I was working in a library at the time. My first sort of foray into that, as soon as I finished my undergraduate work, I was like, well, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And so I ended up like moving back home for a little while. And then there was like an open position with one of the local libraries there. So I applied for that and I did eventually get a job. They actually made a position for me because I was good with technology, which was interesting. The job that I had applied for was like a children's librarian role, which was interesting. They gave someone else that role, and then I ended up working on like their, computers and stuff and maintaining the website and that kind of thing, which, pretty directly led into like the kind of UX stuff that I do now. But when I had my orientation there, they talked about UX, and I thought it was interesting at the time. I was still moving towards like a library position during the first year of my graduate program. About halfway through that, though, I decided, well, they have this opportunity with ORNL as a UX person. So I'd already applied for that once and didn't get the role. But then I applied for it that next year and ended up getting the position that time. So I worked pretty closely with Rachel, Ray Murphy over at ORNL. I'm sure you guys have talked to them before. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. It was a good first exposure working on like an agile team, which is like the bread and butter of doing UX work. It's the primary thing that you end up doing is working directly with a team. Unless you go on like a management track, well, then you're managing people and also still working on teams and like large numbers of teams at one time. I didn't end up getting like a full-time role with Oak Ridge, unfortunately. And I spent a lot of time in between. It took me like a year to get my first entry-level position, which is the role that I'm in now at McGraw-Hill. And that's a great job. I love it. I love working there. We do all kinds of great work. It's super interesting. I work as a part of their digital products group. So like most people know McGraw-Hill because they're publishing history or whatever. But we also moved into like the digital space not super long ago, actually, like within the last 10 years or something. I'm sure they had products before that, but they didn't start becoming like an actual big part of the company until maybe within the last decade or so. But yeah, it's been great. I've learned a lot since being there because I work on a huge team with lots of different designers. We have different sectors of the company that people work for. I primarily work on the K-12 side of things, working on some of their learning management projects there. I might be working on some e-com stuff soon. That would be pretty interesting to do. But we also have like higher ed, professional development, that kind of thing. I would say that the big thing that I learned throughout the whole process, though, is like, I learned a lot about the job hunt and like what you actually need to do to get to a point where people will hire you. And like what you should expect going into those kinds of interviews and like doing demos and that kind of thing. Because design jobs are totally different from like a regular job in a lot of ways. They'll look at your portfolio and like then you can do like a live demonstration or something with them where they give you like a prompt and you have to go in and talk about your thought process and all this other stuff. It's really interesting. It's really frustrating and like hard to navigate sometimes if you're not used to that. But yeah, as far as how the MSIS program kind of prepared me to go into that, I feel like there's two sides of UX, right? And I feel like a lot of people will feel this way if they've been in the program for UX. There's the academic part of doing it, right? There's this, we talk about these big concepts like design thinking and all that, and doing research, and all of that is great. That's like important stuff to know. But where that kind of falls apart is when you get into an actual role. All the process stuff that you do is going to change drastically. Like even just between projects on the same team, you will have a different process all the time. My first project with McGraw-Hill was like not very directed. It was very loose. We did some user research and testing on designs that I had done. We actually ended up doing a couple of rounds with that where our first designs didn't really work out as well as we had hoped they would. And then we made some drastic changes. And the second time we did testing was fantastic. Like it was great. I got great compliments on that one because like other people on the team and like product owners and business people were like, I've never been a part of one of these things that went that well. So that was cool. That was a really fun aspect of things. But yeah, I mean, the process was different both times around, even just between those two different rounds of testing and design. And now we're on a different thing where it's completely different. We have like this huge, the whole K-12 sector is like organized and people are working together on teams that have not been, together before. It's crazy. There's a lot of work happening right now. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of how things are going for me. That's the basic overview of, my career and how I ended up where I am and how my education played into that. From there, I think, we're good to talk about. I've got some talking points here that we can go through, or we can like branch out and do something different if anybody here has questions. Yeah, Maya, you said you had some questions?
Sorry, I muted myself.
Oh, you're fine.
Well, actually, I would love to hear your talking points first, and then I would love to, then I have a million questions. I always have a million questions though, so Michaela, you can pop in whenever. But if you have talking points, I'd love to hear them, and then elucidate or go from there.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is I kind of organize this in a way where it's like, how much knowledge do people have of UX in this thing? Like, is this, I guess, for the people that are going to end up watching this, like none, basically. Okay. In that case, I'll start with like brief overview stuff, and then I'll move down until I get to the point where I'm like, okay, now is a good time for like discussion and questions and stuff. So for anybody that doesn't know what user experience design actually is, it is a field that has, well, it's been around for a lot longer than the actual field has been around, right? So user experience design kind of came around in the 90s out of Apple, and Don Norman, I think, coined that term. But the actual process of like doing design work for things that people interact with has been around as long as people have been interacting with things, right? And making things that people need to interact with. It's especially been prevalent, I think in the 20th century, where a lot of things were new, lots of new technologies were emerging, and people needed to find new ways of interacting with those technologies. I think some of the earliest stuff is like touchstone keypads and stuff for telephones. Yeah, it's an older field than it sounds like on paper. The essential thing that you do as a user experience designer is that you have to be the sort of middle person for everybody, right? It is very intersectional. So you have people that are coming at you from web development, front end and back end development. You have accessibility, you have business people, you have other designers, you have researchers, and it requires you to have like a huge set of knowledge about these different things and knowing how to talk with people and communicate and collaborate. Those are massively important for being successful in the field. And like it's super interesting. Like you talk to different people all over the place all the time. You get to talk to lots of end users. You get to talk to a lot of people who are working on things. You get to talk to a lot of people that are working on things that are totally different from you. It's great as far as just like having a wide set of knowledge. It's super useful. If you have that technical background in like web development, it makes it so much easier to connect with developers. If you like accessibility, those things are super important, especially now, like we're moving into a part where the web is really making a push to become accessible for people that have disabilities. It's really fun. I like the field a lot. I think if you're interested in that kind of things, you know, UX is a great career choice. UX design is super important, mostly because you need that person that's in the middle to kind of pull everything together, right? We have to find the balance between what is going to be possible on the development side, what is going to work for the business, because we can have great ideas, but they may break the bank. You know, they may go too far, we may miss deadlines, all kinds of things can happen. We have to find the middle ground between those two things. And then we also have to figure out how to make these experiences accessible for people. So that's the key of the job, right? You have to be able to make things that people can use, which is why usability is like the key term for UX. Yeah, I think that covers sort of a basic overview, right? I think some of the key skills and stuff that you need to consider when going in to a job like this, there are basically two skills that are super important for anybody that is going to become a designer. Any job that has the word designer on it requires you to have really strong skills in critical thinking and collaboration and communication. Those are probably the most important things that you can do. When we talk about stuff like design thinking and like how there's a process for going through and like finding stuff, like there are tons of different models for how this type of work gets done. There's like the double diamond, and like more recently there's something that's not the double diamond. It's like, I don't even remember exactly what it is, but those things are great for like a mental model of how to do the work, but they are in practice not something that actually ends up happening a lot. Most of the time you're going to be so overwhelmed with all the information that's coming in at you, and you have to somehow synthesize all that stuff together into a working product. That's where the critical thinking skill comes in, right? That's where you need to be able to pick apart what's super important coming from the research, coming from business, coming from development, and coming from accessibility, and being able to say, okay, here are the key things that we need to focus on in this, and then synthesizing that stuff together for the final product. And a lot of times your designs aren't great. Your first pass usually isn't the best or the right design, and that's okay too. Like even if you're in a job, you can feel like things need to be perfect. They don't have to be. A lot of times you'll have like design reviews and stuff, even something that you made that's not great may even just get implemented because it's the best solution that you have within the constraints that you have. But it's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to come back to those things later on. It's totally fine. It happens all the time. I think, let me see, I'm trying to organize my thoughts a little more now too. Well, the other part of this is communication and collaboration, right? So I work with a large team right now. I'm working with a team that has so I work as a part of an agile development team. If you guys have questions about what that is, we can talk about that too. It's super important for this kind of work. You will pretty much always work on an agile team if you are doing any kind of tech work. Especially these days, it's like the most common model for doing the work. I think even like public jobs and everything are starting to adopt the model. But I work as a part of an agile team. Actually, I work as a part of multiple agile teams where I'm the UX sort of presence for them, the user advocate. I make the designs. They're based on, the stuff that we get in, whether it's like a bug report from, a user or something, or it's, a common complaint that we need a new design for, a new solution, or, something coming from business that says, hey, there's this feature we want to implement and we need design work done for it. I do all of that kind of stuff on multiple different teams. It's a lot to manage, but it is also really fun and interesting to get to be a part of different stuff all the time. But you have to be able to communicate with those people. On an agile team, you'll typically have at least one person who is from the business side. They're the product owner, or the Scrum Master or whatever. And then you'll have like a lead developer and a team of developers behind them. You'll usually work very closely with like the lead developer and then the product owner, at least in our setup at McGraw-Hill. You will also work with the other developers too, but like probably not as much as the other two. The way that things sort of work is you will have a design, that you have to do. They'll give you a ticket for it. You go and you work on it, and then you come back, you bring it up with, your product owner and the lead developer and make sure that it's viable. Then you run it through accessibility to be sure that it is okay for people with disabilities. And then we can start the implementation process. And usually throughout the implementation process, developers will have questions about things, and you'll need to be on call to be able to answer those and help them out. Also as a part of that, I work with a team of other designers. We do have like a larger design group there where we make decisions about UX across the company, about our design system, our Figma libraries, that kind of stuff. We do have to work together to make sure that that stuff is consistent and that we're implementing patterns across our different products consistently, so that, we have a nice consistent feel to the things that we create. And that's also super important. And then, there's other people too. Accessibility is not integrated into our teams just yet. I really think they should be. On any Agile team, you should really probably have somebody that is ingrained. As far as doing that kind of work, it's really difficult. There is a lot to keep in mind while going through it. I recommend, if you're going into UX, to learn about accessibility. It's definitely a key feature of things, especially these days. Those are the two big things for becoming a designer. You need to be able to think critically and synthesize information as it comes in, and you need to be able to work and collaborate with other people. And if you can do those two things, I think you could get any design job anywhere. The skills and stuff that you learn, like the tool that you use or the different methodologies and processes of how you go about things, those things are not nearly as important to know up front as just having these soft skills, right? That is sort of what I wanted to talk about, getting through some of these talking points. Does anybody have any questions about that stuff so far?
I do.
Okay.
There's a guy like blowing leaves right outside me, so I apologize if you can't hear. But I wanted to know if there were any particular, oh my God, if there were any particular classes at UTK that you found were beneficial to you. And I know you said there weren't any specific skills, but I wanted to know if there was any like maybe programming or anything like that that you felt was essential to working in this field.
It's been a bit since I've been in some of those classes, but I do remember taking, I think we had at the time like 3 or 4 kind of UX specific classes. We had like human interaction, human computer interaction. I took a cataloging class, which actually surprisingly had a lot of UX kind of value in it. So I would recommend that one too. I don't know if that has changed since then though. Oh gosh, there was another one. I feel like there was a specific UX class, but I don't remember exactly what it was called. I would have to look at my transcripts again. I think there are. The key, I think, is to look for a class that will let you exercise those critical thinking kind of skills, right? Anything that is going to ask you to take something and break it down and put it back together in a way that is presenting new information, that's going to be helpful for any kind of a career where you have to do that kind of work, right? Any practice that you can get at doing that is super helpful. And also working collaboratively with other people too, which is very difficult in school, and it's essential in jobs, right? All right. Any other questions?
If Maya doesn't have another one, oh yeah, she can. Here, just answer her question. I'll go after her.
What proportion of my work is technical? I don't know. It depends. I am definitely more of a technically minded person. This is why UX is so interesting, right? And why I like it so much. you can have all kinds of different skills and still be able to be an effective part of a design team. I definitely fall more on the side of like, I know HTML fairly well, I know CSS, I am not as good with JavaScript, but I'm great with Figma. Like, I would say I'm like an expert in using Figma. If anyone has questions around that tool, I can do that here too. But most of what I end up doing is technical. Like, we have a lot of discussions between me and the other technical people on the design team because we're trying to make decisions about how things are going to work and how we get to point A to point B, right? So like, we're doing this thing now where we're doing a huge rework of one of our products. We're updating the design language for it and the interface to use. If you don't know what like a CSS library is or a JavaScript framework, Bootstrap is one of them. It's what's used by Twitter and a bunch of other places. I think they actually created it. But we are in the process of moving from using Bootstrap 3. And so it comes with a lot of new features, a lot of new accessibility, but it also means that a lot of things have to be changed. We have to figure out the best ways to do that. So we have a lot of conversations around that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting. It's great to understand that stuff, by the way. Like, it'll help you so much in conversations when a dev has a question and you can understand what they're talking about. If you can go on a web page and inspect something and understand what's happening in the code there, it's massively helpful. At least in doing like design for web experiences. There's tons of different types of UX, right? It's not just web experiences. There's like, you can do UX for like video games and stuff and create interfaces for games. You can create interfaces for like, desktop only applications, which are totally different from doing any kind of web design stuff. Process is kind of the same. You still end up making mocks and stuff, but it's totally different in the way that it's done. Yeah. But yeah, I would say a lot of my work specifically is technical, but you could do all kinds of different things. We had someone who was an illustrator that made like icons and vector stuff. They were super great at that. We have people that are great with visual design, language, all that kind of stuff. And then we have people that are developmentally minded. We have people that are accessibility minded. You can come from almost any background and be successful, I would say. And yeah, Figma is a great design tool. It's right now, it's the best one. There are some ones that have been coming up recently that I think could be serious competitors, but Figma is holds such a large market share of the like design tool space that Adobe actually is trying to buy them. That's a big deal if you know what that means. So yeah, it's a fantastic tool. We can definitely take a look at that if anybody's interested. All right, does anybody have any other questions?
I do again.
Okay.
Like I said, I have a million, so I'll try to. But anyway, I wanted to know what experiences you. So you I think in the bio and what you said at the beginning was that you were originally looking at a children's librarian job, and I wanted to know what experiences you brought with you and what experiences you had to gain and where those skills, where those sort of came from. I guess you touched on it a little bit, but just sort of more specifically.
Yeah. So my original I'll get more into like my whole path of how I got from A to B, right? So I was working in a public library in North Carolina when I first started the program. I really liked what I did there. And, I was thinking, well, I probably want to go on and do more of this kind of work. I was looking at the school librarianship track initially. And then that just, I don't know, something about it just didn't feel great while I was in some of the classes and everything. So I was like, well, I'll try a different path. So I went towards the cataloging route. And I did really enjoy cataloging because like, that's me, that's the type of person that I am, right? Like I have a very technical skill set. I enjoy that kind of work. and getting into all the detail-oriented kind of things that are required for something like that. I did have to leave that job after COVID started, though. And I ended up getting a job with the county library system there, which is like a much bigger kind of library, right? Because like there are different levels to this stuff. The library I was working at initially was a small, privately owned public library space, right? They had like some donors and stuff that donated the building. The family or whatever was keeping it up and making sure that, you know, they donated it to the city, and the city was making sure everything was taken care of. And so it was a very small library, one singular library instead of having multiple libraries as a part of a system. Working for the county library system was totally different, right? We had multiple different libraries that were a part of that system, and I would have to work at different libraries all the time. I primarily worked at one, which was much less convenient for me because it was like 45 minutes away and I had to drive and all that. And then occasionally I would get to work at the one that was really close to my house that was like 5 minutes. And they had totally different feels between them. And just after working in the actual environment of a library, I was like, I don't know that I'm actually going to enjoy doing this. So I sat and I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to work on something that would give me a little bit more creative freedom, you know, a little bit more potential to do something, you know, interesting, and also cater to that technical sort of skill set that I have. And that's how I started making that transition into UX. My time, like in the program, I don't really feel like I got too many of the actual like hard sort of skills for working in UX. I definitely developed more of the soft skills, right? Which I think is important. Learned a lot about process, learned a lot about research, that sort of thing. And then working with ORNL, I sort of got to start you know, dipping my toes into it and see how things worked out. And it was interesting, right? There wasn't as much like structure in that UX environment because they were still new to it. I think Ray actually developed the program there for UX after I left. So we were really kind of experimenting with things there. But getting to move on to McGraw-Hill, my portfolio when I got hired was terrible. It's still terrible. I haven't gone back to update it, which goes to show you can get a job even if your portfolio is not great, right? It's important to have a decent portfolio, and I can talk about what makes a decent portfolio too. But yeah, it was bad. But my manager saw some potential, I guess, gave me a chance. And since then, man, I have learned so much just on the job. Like 90% of what I've learned with UX has been on the job. Stuff like learning the tool, learning, you know, programming languages, and learning about accessibility was a big one. I actually do work for UT with Amy Forrester. Occasionally still, where I think it's like once a month, maybe 1 or 2 contracts a month, where she has me do an accessibility evaluation for some databases for the Library Accessibility Association. Great experience, by the way. That has been super fantastic experience for like learning about accessibility. Invaluable for what I do now too. Yeah, I mean, I would say most skills are on the job skills, right? Like you will learn them as you go through. So I am not as concerned if someone comes to me and is like, I don't know how to use Figma, because Figma is like intuitive to learn. And once you learn it, that skill set is like applicable to any other design software. But yeah, definitely on the job is where I learned the vast majority of those skills. All right.
Yeah,
Any questions?
we can talk about Figma if you want. That would be really neat.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about Figma.
Mhm.
Let's see. So I can actually just pull up the interface too. I'll just make a new file. Figma is kind of a unique tool because it has some features that other design softwares don't have. This is the basic interface for Figma. When you open it up for the first time, you can come in and create objects and frames. These are super important. Frames are. You don't necessarily need to create it the way I just did, but like you can. But yeah, Figma is really crazy. I can show you a project that I've been working on in my personal time, because we were working with Bootstrap 5 at work, and I was like, well, you know, this would be good practice to learn how to use the tool a little bit better and, you know, build some cool stuff. So Bootstrap 5 is a CSS library. They have like a base set of stylings for things that you can change and all sorts of stuff, but they have components. So I went through and rebuilt all of Bootstrap 5 in Figma. And so we have tons of stuff here. We have the color set. Figma has this thing called styles where you can make text styles and color styles and apply that to these things so that they're persistent across your designs. Super important type of stuff. We have tons of different things here that probably don't make sense if you're just seeing it for the first time. I think the big thing to learn with Figma, though, like the most important aspect of Figma to being like an expert in using it, and it's something that's difficult to get to, is to learn how to use auto layout, which is this great feature where if you put objects inside of a frame, you will have access to some new options here. One of them is called auto layout. This is like the key tool to making anything in Figma. Use it religiously. You can increase padding on the sides of things, spacing between objects, the direction that those objects are going. You can make multiple frames and stack, like I have this frame, I can duplicate it, maybe. Put them together in an auto layouted frame, and now I have, you know, two different things here. It's really interesting. I could teach a whole class on Figma, I think, probably. And people do all the time, right? There are some really interesting new competitors to Figma, though, that I think could honestly challenge Figma's like dominance in the marketplace. There's one called Penpot that I checked out recently. I learned about it from one of my coworkers. It's really cool. You can do way more with it than you can with Figma as far as the auto layout stuff, and they're working on making some new features with like a grid layout, which is a big deal because like tables in Figma are notoriously hard. Like making a table in a design software is super difficult. It's like, because you need to be able to have control of both the horizontal and the vertical aspect of the column or row. And you can't do that with anything right now. Anyway, that's geeky Figma stuff that I'm talking about. That's not as important, I think. But anyway, it's good to learn a design software. I would start with Figma because it is industry standard at this point, I would say. You have other things like Sketch. Sketch arguably is more feature rich, I think. They don't have auto layout built into the system, I don't think. They might at this point. I haven't checked on it in a while. But Sketch is also a good one to learn, but it's Mac only. So like if you don't have a Mac, I wouldn't worry about that. Figma is great for everybody. Yeah, start with this one. This is where you start to learn the actual ins and outs of doing like design work with a tool. But yeah, it's great. Does anybody have any like specific questions in Figma? If they know anything about it, I guess.
So do you have to like purchase the program, or is it like free to download? And like once you have it, like what, like if I wanted to create a website, like would Figma be good for that? Like to lay out? Like this is all super new to me. So I'm trying to figure out like logistics, how that works.
Yeah, so Figma is free for anybody to get an account with. The free version, I think you're limited with like 10 draft boards or something like that. They have a professional version that's like $10 a month or something. It's not very much. There's like an enterprise version, which you probably don't ever need to worry about unless you're like starting a company or something. I use the professional version right now because I'm working on some community stuff. Both of these things that you're seeing here in my tabs are actually community kits that I created or updated from somebody else's work to try and make them a little more usable. So you can go and look at this stuff on the Figma community now and mess around with it if you want to. But yeah, as far as like what Figma is actually for, Figma is the design part of a website, right? It can output like code and stuff. It's not going to be the best code. And if you're working on a team, like an enterprise level team, it's not going to be relevant to what you're working on pretty much at all. You can get some of this stuff here. This is CSS. You can get some stuff for iOS and Android. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about any of this stuff. The real thing here is like blocking out what you're going to do. So like if I have a web page, right? I'm here. I know I need like a header up here. Actually, this is a great opportunity to show how some of this stuff works. Figma has library features. These two things that I've created are libraries so that I can pull stuff in to work with. I just activated that one, so let's see. I can pull stuff in from that library to use here. And it's like if I know that I need, you know, a header here at the top, I can set that, and I can set all of this stuff into like an auto layouted frame, set the different constraints here for it. So like, I know I don't want any kind of margin or anything around the back there. I know I want this to always fit the width of the screen, so I can play with that. If I need like a header or something, I can pull that in. For the page, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with this. I mean, it's a tool basically for making that initial pass at your layout from start until you get to these pixel perfect mocks of what it should look like in practice. That's what it's for. It's not really going to convert to code or anything. I think there actually are AI tools now, like a ChatGPT integration that will allow you to take your design and have ChatGPT generate all the code. But I'm not sure if that works well or not. I haven't tested it at all. Seems super interesting though. I would love to try it out. Any other questions with it?
I think Maya put one in the chat.
Oh, did you? Sorry, it's hard to see chat while I'm
Yeah,
sharing
I can
screen.
read it out. She said, can you talk a little bit about specific types of projects at McGraw-Hill?
Yeah, so I've been on a few different projects now. A lot of stuff ends up just being like one-off small things, like we need a button for this, or we need to add like IDs here or something. Like it's a lot of it is basic stuff like that, and it takes me like 5 minutes to do. But then there is some work that is very involved. The first project I was on at McGraw-Hill took me a long time. My manager thinks it still isn't finished. It's finished. I don't know. I don't know how that wire gets crossed, but we cross wires on that one like a lot. I'm not sure why. The first project I was on, we were working on what is essentially an online quiz builder, right? Like it's a test builder. And there's been a persistent problem with that for a while where like they couldn't see the full question. Teachers that were trying to build assessments and stuff, because the way the interface was set up, they couldn't see the full question. And so it was hard for them to make decisions about what they're going to add to their tests. So we did a couple of passes at this. The first pass was to not change as much about the interface and try and give them more of that question stem. So like instead of doing one line, we give them 2 lines of it before it truncates in the table. And that was okay. It was an improvement, but it wasn't really what they were hoping for, I think. And so we went back to the drawing board on this. And the big thing that this boils down to is that tables can be kind of restrictive in a website. It really restricts the way that you can lay out data. Sometimes it's super necessary to have a table just so that all the data and the relationships between that data are clear. But other times you're going to want to pull that stuff out. And that's what we ended up having to do with this. We pulled that data out, we put it all on individual cards where now they can see the full question, because these questions can get like paragraphs long, right? They could see the full question there. They can see the answers and all this other stuff. And when we went back to the users and started doing testing with that version of it, they were really happy with how it turned out. Like, I think I talked about this earlier. That project was the one where when we took it to users, unilaterally, they said it was an improvement over what was there. And we actually had people that were excited to get in and try it out. They even made comparisons between a competitor and our product and said that this seems a lot easier than competitor's product, right? So those are big things, right? Like, and we had business people that were listening in on this stuff, and for them to hear that, that's great for me, right? Because that gets me a lot of praise and all sorts of stuff. It means that I did my job well. And the users loved it too. So like, that's the other key thing there. But yeah, like that's kind of my big project that I was on so far. We still haven't implemented it. We are going to have to go back and do a little more work on it. There's some accessibility things that need tweaked and fixed. And then we also need to update it for our new designs. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy because that project was even ahead of what we're doing now. It was like anticipating that new design language that we're moving forward with. So it's really cool. It was a great project. Right now, we're working on this big reskin project. And that's mostly just taking screens that exist and updating them with new design language and color themes and components and stuff. After that, we'll probably start getting back more into feature work, which is where the interesting, like, critical thought type stuff comes in.
Does anyone else have a question? I can hop in. Okay, so you might get a little mad at me, but I watch a lot of YouTube videos and people like on there, they get they're sponsored by like Squarespace and like Wix and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Like, what are your thoughts on like the standardization of web design, I guess, by programs and corporations like them? And like, what do you think the future of UX web design is going to look like if there are these companies that like automate it for you? I'm just
Yeah.
curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, those things are great. I think the key difference between something like that and what ends up happening with when you have like a company that is trying to put forth a professional website and everything. And there are tons of professional websites now that are using like Squarespace and stuff, and it's great. Like, it really makes it easier to get into it. But also, when you do that, you're introducing a lot of limitations, right? So like, if it doesn't have it, it's not going to do it unless you can like build it yourself. And that's the key difference, right? We work on things that are very specialized. We can't just take like a Squarespace product and, you know, throw it out there and that'll work for us, right? We have things that need like, we have big security requirements because we work with like student data and teacher data and school systems and all sorts of stuff. You know, it's kind of like there's this sharp divide where it's like, if you're working on a personal project or something, or if you need a portfolio site, Squarespace and everything is great. If you're making a product that's like low risk with data and all that, it's probably fine. But when you get into where you really need people that are knowledgeable with like cybersecurity and design, and you want to present something that is newer or cutting edge or pushing the boundaries of what we're doing with design work, right? That's where you need UX, and that's where you need like you need developers, you need accessibility people. Like, that is the big thing, because especially with, you know, newer kinds of tools and stuff coming out like AI, that's probably going to change the landscape of what the web looks like significantly. Not just because you can use an AI to generate a website, but also because of integrations with those features, like it's going to be a lot. There'll be a lot of change coming in the future, I would assume. I haven't felt any of that just yet where I work. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Oh, another point here to bring up too, if you see a job with a title like designer in it, at least for right now, you're pretty insulated from automation because these jobs require you to think critically and communicate and collaborate with other people. Like I said, those are the two key things. Those are two big things that AI can't do right now. So your job is pretty safe. The market that I work in with education, you know, after COVID happened, there was this huge flood of education dollars coming into like ed tech, and we're still kind of riding on that wave at this point. And based on what I understand from the business side people that I work with, that's not going away anytime soon. It's just about capturing that market share. So if you want a secure career, UX is a good one. Any other questions?
Going once. Going twice. Okay, well, I think we're set for today. Emily, do you have anything else that you would want to talk about?
Yeah, you know, there are a couple of things here. I did want to talk a little bit, especially for people that may watch this later on and that are interested in, you know, UX as a career. Stuff like job hunting. Like I was in the job hunt for like a year. So I can talk about like your portfolio, why it's important, what they're actually looking for in a portfolio, what to do when you get into an interview, and how to handle that, and some other stuff like that. So, like I said, my portfolio was not great when I did end up getting a job. And that makes it a lot harder to get a job. But the key thing to think about with your portfolio is they're not looking for stuff that's pretty, right? When we talk about design, yes, that comes with a certain amount of like aesthetic quality to it, right? You want things to look good, but the real key thing that they look for in a portfolio is your thought process. Can you take a problem, break it down, do that critical thinking, and then create new solutions for it? That's what they're looking for. Even if it's not perfect, right? As long as you can show that there is a thought process there and that you are really critically thinking about the problem and how to address it, that's what they want to see. At least on the design side. Research side is a little different, right? But that's the key thing for your portfolio to keep in mind. The other thing is when you get into interviews, there will be occasionally, if you're doing like design work, they will have you do like a demo, right? Or like a test. It's pretty common in any kind of a creative industry that you'll get a test. Actually, even developers get tests too. But like your test as a designer is probably going to be, they're going to give you a prompt. That prompt could be anything. And like there are tons of different ways to think about that prompt and like what they might be looking for. Listen carefully to how they word it and what they're looking for. And then, you know, go from there. They may actually even send you a prompt before that too. It's not uncommon. But the key thing to remember when you get into doing that work, doing the test, is what is this person looking for in me right now while I'm doing this? Because the test that I was given before I started work at McGraw-Hill was, looking back on it, at the time I was like not sure, right? But now when I look back at that interview, I'm like, okay, this test was really just about seeing, can I think through a problem and can I come up with different solutions? Can I come up with a range of different solutions for solving that problem, right? And I did, and that's ultimately why I was able to get the job. But that's the real key to doing that sort of thing. Listen to what they're saying, ask questions. Like anytime you do a design project, ask every question that comes to your mind, even if you think it's dumb, because that will show people that you are actually trying to think through it and that you're seeking out those requirements. You're seeking those bits of information that are going to get to the right answer, right? Always ask questions in those kinds of interviews. And those are really kind of the two most important things too. You know, I can give other tips, but you'll hear them from dozens of other kinds of UX portfolios and stuff. Those are the things that I think are more unique that I can give you.
Okay, well, Emily, if you're done, I think we're all good. This was so great. Thank you so much for your time today, talking to us about UX design and your experiences in there and all the tips and tricks and helpful advice. So thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And yeah, we'll be putting this up within the next couple of days. So if you're watching this afterwards, hi, thank you for coming all the way to the end. But thank you so much, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It was nice to get to come and talk about this stuff. Hopefully it's helpful. I don't know if anyone on this call is thinking about a UX career, but I recommend it. It's great. I enjoy what I do a lot. If you're a creative type of person or a technically minded person, you know, it's a great middle ground field for a lot of different people. And for anybody that's watching this back, I hope that there's some stuff here that is helpful for you.
Okay, everyone take care.